He was the man you trusted with your life. A doctor who held the power to heal, but chose instead to kill. Harold Shipman, a name that sends shivers down the spine of an entire nation. To his patients, he was a compassionate caregiver. To the world, he became something far darker, a monster hiding in plain sight. Over 2 decades, Harold Shipman built a facade of trust and care while secretly orchestrating one of the most chilling killing sprees in modern history. The numbers were staggering. Over 250 lives taken, each one a person who believed they were safe in his hands. But how did a family doctor, a man who promised to protect, become the deadliest serial killer the world has ever known? And how did no one see the truth until it was far too late? This is the story of Harold Shipman, Dr. Death. Harold Frederick Shipman was born on January 14, 1946, in Nottingham, England. Growing up in a modest, working-class family, Shipman was the second of 3 children. His father, Harold Shipman Sr., was a lorry driver, a reserved and somewhat distant figure. But it was his mother, Vera, who dominated young Harold's life. Vera Shipman was a strong-willed and controlling woman, often described as cold and aloof to others, but deeply devoted to her son Harold. She believed he was destined for greatness and made no secret of her high expectations for him. For Harold, her approval became everything, and he basked in her unwavering attention. Vera's intense focus on Harold often isolated him from his peers. While other children were encouraged to play and socialize, Harold was taught to value discipline, self-control, and ambition above all else. Vera instilled in him a sense of superiority, convincing him he was destined for a life far beyond the confines of their working-class neighborhood. This early sense of detachment, combined with his mother's influence, planted the seeds of Harold's eventual arrogance, an unwavering belief that he was smarter, better, and more deserving than those around him. In 1963, when Harold was 17, Vera was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. Her illness marked a profound turning point in Harold's life. Determined to care for her himself, Harold became her primary caregiver, an experience that would profoundly shape his view of medicine and mortality. Harold watched closely as morphine brought his mother relief from the excruciating pain of her illness. But for Harold, this wasn't just an act of compassion. It was a moment of revelation. He witnessed, perhaps for the first time, the extraordinary power of medicine to control not just pain, but life and death itself. Vera Shipman passed away in June 1963, leaving Harold devastated, but also profoundly changed. Losing the person he adored most in the world cemented his fascination with control and power. It was during these formative years that Harold's dark obsession with life, death, and authority began to take root. After his mother's death, Harold resolved to become a doctor, a decision many believed was inspired by his desire to help others. But as time would reveal, Harold's motivations were far more sinister. Medicine for him was not just a career. It was a means of wielding absolute power over life and death. In 1970, Shipman graduated from Leeds School of Medicine and began his medical career. Initially, he showed promise, earning the trust and admiration of both colleagues and patients. But even during these early years, cracks were beginning to form in the facade of the devoted doctor. Shipman's early years in medicine were marred by his growing addiction to pethidine, a powerful painkiller. In 1975, he was caught forging prescriptions and was forced to leave his position in disgrace. But this setback did little to curb his ambitions or his dark impulses. Harold Shipman's early years laid the foundation for his future crimes. Fueled by his mother's influence, his fascination with control, and his desire for power, Shipman's descent into darkness was just beginning. And soon, the small town of Hyde would feel the full weight of his deadly obsession. In 1977, after overcoming his pethidine addiction and rebuilding his career, Harold Shipman moved to Hyde, a quiet town near Manchester. He established himself as a general practitioner, becoming a cornerstone of the community. For decades, Shipman built a reputation as a kind, dependable doctor, a man who always had time for his patients. Little did they know, the trusted Dr. Shipman had brought his deadly practices with him. Shipman's role as a general practitioner gave him unparalleled access to his victims. His victims were predominantly elderly women. Many lived alone and relied on him not just as a doctor, but as a source of companionship and support. Shipman exploited this trust to carry out his murders undetected. By the 1990s, he was claiming lives at an alarming rate, sometimes signing multiple death certificates in a single week. Shipman's weapon of choice was diamorphine, the pharmaceutical form of heroin. As a trained doctor, he had easy access to the drug, which he stored in his medical bag. The victims rarely suspected anything was wrong. Many even trusted him to ease their discomfort in their final moments. But what Shipman administered wasn't comfort. It was a death sentence. The diamorphine would act quickly, slowing the victim's breathing until their hearts stopped. Shipman would then fabricate medical records to make it appear that the deaths were due to natural causes or pre-existing conditions. In most cases, the families never questioned him. Shipman didn't just kill, he cultivated trust. He often attended the funerals of his victims, offering comfort to grieving families and reinforcing his image as a compassionate doctor. In Hyde, he became a beloved figure, known for his dedication and kindness. This allowed him to operate in plain sight for over 2 decades. Between the late 1970s and 1998, Shipman is believed to have murdered over 250 patients. His victims were typically elderly women in their 70s or 80s, though some were younger. Many were in good health before their sudden deaths. Shipman meticulously covered his tracks by falsifying medical records. He retroactively recorded symptoms and conditions to make each death appear natural. By forging these documents, he avoided scrutiny from both grieving families and his colleagues. Many families believed their loved ones had died of heart attacks or strokes, conditions that Shipman falsely documented in their records. His calm demeanor and authoritative position left little room for doubt. By the 1990s, Shipman's killing spree had reached its peak. His confidence grew with every death, and he became more brazen in his actions. At times, he killed multiple patients in a single week, leaving behind a trail of grief and unanswered questions. Yet, despite the growing number of deaths, Shipman's reputation remained untarnished. For years, he exploited the trust placed in him, weaving a web of lies that shielded him from suspicion. But no killer is infallible, and Shipman's arrogance would eventually lead to his downfall. Shipman's crimes might have continued indefinitely, if not for a critical mistake. In 1998, his greed and arrogance led him to forge a will, setting off an investigation that would unravel the horrifying truth behind his career as a doctor. Kathleen Grundy was a beloved figure in Hyde. A former mayoress, she was known for her energy, generosity, and active role in the community. At 81, Kathleen was far from frail. She led an independent, vibrant life that inspired those around her. To her family and friends, Kathleen was not just an elderly woman. She was a force of nature, defying the stereotypes of old age. That's why her sudden death on June 24, 1998, came as a devastating shock to everyone who knew her. On the morning of June 24, 1998, Shipman visited Kathleen Grundy at her home. As her trusted doctor, his presence raised no alarm. But unbeknownst to Kathleen, this routine visit would mark the end of her life. Shipman injected Kathleen with a lethal dose of diamorphine, a drug often used in end-of-life care. For Shipman, it was the perfect weapon, effective, fast-acting, and one that could easily be justified as medically necessary. When Kathleen's body was discovered, it appeared that she had died peacefully at home. Shipman, who signed her death certificate, attributed her passing to natural causes, citing her age and claiming she had suffered a sudden heart attack. But Angela Woodruff, Kathleen's daughter, was not convinced. As a solicitor, Angela was meticulous and detail-oriented. She knew her mother was in excellent health and had shown no signs of illness leading up to her death. Angela's suspicions deepened when she discovered a will that had allegedly been drafted by her mother shortly before her death. The document was shocking, not only because it excluded Angela and her family from any inheritance, but because it named Shipman as the sole beneficiary of Kathleen's estate, leaving all her assets, worth nearly £400,000, to Harold Shipman. To Angela, the will was an obvious forgery. The language and handwriting didn't match her mother's style, and the sudden decision to disinherit her family seemed entirely out of character. It was clear that something was deeply wrong. Kathleen Grundy was a well-respected member of the Hyde community, active, independent, and in excellent health. On June 24, 1998, she was found dead at home, just hours after a visit from her trusted doctor, Harold Shipman. Her death, like so many others, was initially ruled as natural causes. But this time, Shipman made a critical error. The will claimed to be Kathleen Grundy's final wishes, leaving her entire estate worth £386,000 to Harold Shipman. But Angela Woodruff, a solicitor herself, immediately noticed inconsistencies. The will was typed, something her mother had never done before, and the signature appeared forged. Angela Woodruff's suspicions prompted her to report Shipman to the police. Her actions initiated an investigation that would unravel the shocking truth behind the doctor's seemingly spotless career. Detectives soon discovered troubling patterns in Shipman's patient records, particularly his high number of elderly patients dying under sudden and suspicious circumstances. Shipman's frequent use of diamorphine raised immediate red flags. The drug, while effective in managing pain, was not commonly prescribed for patients who were otherwise healthy. Investigators began to wonder if Shipman had been using the drug to hasten his patients' deaths. In August 1998, Kathleen Grundy's body was exhumed. Toxicology reports confirmed the presence of a lethal dose of diamorphine in her system. This discovery proved what Angela Woodruff had feared. Her mother had been murdered. With the evidence from Grundy's case, detectives widened their investigation. They exhumed the bodies of several other patients, finding traces of diamorphine in each. What began as a single suspicious death soon turned into one of the largest murder investigations in British history. On September 7, 1998, Harold Shipman was arrested on suspicion of murder. During questioning, Shipman remained calm and uncooperative, denying all accusations. Despite his composed demeanor, the evidence against him was mounting. Investigators uncovered forged medical records, discrepancies in death certificates, and an alarming number of cremation forms signed by Shipman himself. These documents showed a clear pattern of premeditation, implicating Shipman in the deaths of dozens of patients. The trial of Harold Shipman began on October 5, 1999, at Preston Crown Court. He faced 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery in the death of Kathleen Grundy. The prosecution argued that Shipman had systematically killed his patients using overdoses of diamorphine. The prosecution laid out a damning case. Witnesses testified about Shipman's suspicious behavior, including his insistence on signing cremation forms and his reluctance to involve families in medical decisions. Angela Woodruff's testimony about the forged will became a cornerstone of the case, exposing Shipman's greed and arrogance. Shipman's defense team argued that the deaths were natural and that the prosecution lacked direct evidence proving his intent to kill. Despite their efforts, the overwhelming circumstantial evidence left little doubt in the minds of the jury. On January 31, 2000, Harold Shipman was found guilty of 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the judge recommending that he never be released. The trial brought some closure to the families of Shipman's victims, but also raised troubling questions. How had he evaded suspicion for so long? How many more lives had he taken? A subsequent inquiry estimated that Shipman may have murdered as many as 250 patients during his career. Shipman's crimes left an indelible scar on the high community and the medical profession. His case prompted sweeping reforms in how doctors are monitored, including stricter controls on prescription drugs and death certifications. In January 2004, just 4 years into his sentence, Harold Shipman was found dead in his cell at Wakefield Prison. His death sparked mixed reactions. Some saw it as an escape from justice, while others believed it marked the end of a dark chapter in British history. Harold Shipman was a man who betrayed the ultimate trust placed in him as a doctor. His case serves as a chilling reminder of how evil can hide in plain sight and the devastating consequences of unchecked power. Shipman's story is one of manipulation, betrayal, and tragedy, but it is also a story of resilience, the resilience of the victims' families, the community of Hyde, and society as a whole, as they work to ensure that such evil is never allowed to thrive again. His legacy may be one of darkness, but from that darkness, a greater awareness has emerged, a commitment to vigilance, accountability, and the protection of trust. May the memory of those lost to Harold Shipman's hands continue to guide us, reminding us that justice must be constant and that even the most trusted can betray us. It is a lesson we must never forget.